Alrighty, welcome back into the Addison to 35th podcast. I am your host, Ryan Herrera. Reopening day is almost here. Cubs play the Diamondbacks Thursday, March 27th in Arizona. Going to preview that a little bit today, but first, let me welcome on today's guest. It is Jordan Bastian, the Cubs beat writer for MLB.com. Jordan, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good, Ryan. How you doing, man?
Good, man. It's good to be good to chat with you again. It's been a while. I know you've been
Yeah,
down in Arizona for a month and a half now, except for a trip to Japan, which is kind of where I wanted to start. Obviously, the
right.
Cubs were out there starting their season in LA or against LA, dropped those first two games, but I'm just curious overall from your perspective what that trip was like as far as adjusting to Japan and then coming back and getting back into spring training mode, but also what the coaches and the players kind of talked about with the same kind of experience of going there, getting back into regular season mode, and then coming back and finishing out spring training.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend a whole podcast just talking about that trip. It was incredible on a number of fronts. I mean, personally, professionally, I think the players all kind of say the same thing. I think Craig Counsell kind of summed it up perfectly at the very end when he said, "Hey, the games didn't go the way we wanted, but this was an experience of a lifetime."
Yeah,
And I think that really is the truth. And for a team, there's a lot of playoff tested players on this roster, and they brought in more guys that have already won and played deep into October. So, this trip in terms of like experiencing a postseason like environment, it didn't really mean much for a Dansby Swanson or a Kyle Tucker or a Justin Turner, some of those guys. But when you're talking about Pete Crow Armstrong, Matt Shaw, some of these younger guys that are breaking into the big leagues, even some of the guys that have been with the Cubs for a while but haven't pitched in the playoffs, guys like, Justin Steele and things like that. I mean, there are players in that room that haven't experienced the playoffs. And I can tell you, with having covered the playoffs, having covered the World Series, this was as close as covering the playoffs as I've come anything else outside of the playoffs.
yeah,
The press conferences were massive. The amount of media following, obviously Otani, but even Shota Imanaga and Seiya Suzuki. I mean, they were both exhausted by the end of this. Just the pregame ceremony, having a lineup on the chalk lines every game and have the team announced every game. The fanfare, the drummers, Pikachu. I mean, we had everything for all those games. It was
yeah,
insane. And it's like it was this massive show that went on for a week in this massive city where you can't walk a block without seeing Shohei Otani's face or hearing his name on an intercom. It was overwhelming, but baseball is like part of that culture. I think it was really cool
yeah.
for players to see that I think at one point Craig Counsell said it almost felt like baseball was bigger there than even an opening day would be in America in some places. Um, so that was overwhelming, and I think that's good repetition or just good life experience, player experience for a lot of that guys in that room because this team wants to get to October, and this was a good kind of test. You're playing the world champions, you're in that environment, and April's not going to get any easier with the teams they have on the schedule.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of tendrils we can go down on that Japan trip, but I think that was my main takeaway is like what an experience for this team. And also it kind of we wrote about this a little bit, maybe expedited the sort of building team chemistry thing, which
Right.
whether people believe that's real or it's not real, you know, good teams have it. Bad teams can also have good chemistry. But this is an experience where they had a lot of off the field time spent together. Jed Hoyer made the point of like in spring training, it's not a situation where guys are like getting up and taking their families out to breakfast together. They all kind of live in their own places and have their families.
Hmm.
Here it was like they're all at the hotel together, they're getting up, they're spending the day together, they're playing tourists together, and then they're going to work together at the exhibition games or the real games. So kind of that chemistry building gets built potentially a little bit faster for a team that has a lot of new faces as well. So
Yeah.
I think those are kind of my main takeaways from that trip.
Yeah, I like the point of getting like a as close, like you mentioned, as close to a playoff like atmosphere as you can get outside of actually being in the playoffs, because that is important with a team that is here in 2025 with goals and honestly expectations of making the playoffs. But
Right.
also in that Japan trip, You had actual baseball played, actual regular season games played, and while they dropped both games, and while it's about as small of a sample as you can get in a
Against
162 game season,
against the
like
best team in baseball, right?
exactly right. You're facing Shohei Ohtani and two Japanese pitchers who could reasonably be in the upper echelon of pitchers. But I mean, I'm curious, did you have any takeaways from the gameplay that's like, again, it's a small sample, but just like this is something that I'm going to monitor moving forward as the regular season starts?
Uh, I think it was impressive to see Shota Imanaga walk away with no hits allowed.
Mhm.
It looked like the enormity of that game and that moment, maybe caught up with him a little bit just in terms of, I mean, I think he walked four guys. It wasn't, it was like
Yeah.
6 or 7 starts into his season last year before he walked a fourth guy. So maybe we saw a little bit of that like adrenaline at the front end of that game turn into a little bit of exhaustion. And he was admittedly exhausted when he got back to the States. And that's why Craig Counsell didn't pitch him in another spring training game ahead of his next regular season
Mhm.
start, because he wanted to just kind of, hey, you take the time you need to kind of cool down after that whole experience. Because I mean, again, to see the media following him, having his family there, like, it was a lot for him. So I think a takeaway was that he walked off that mound with 4 no-hit innings despite not looking his sharpest, and I think that's a
Yeah.
great sign. I think we saw that throughout last year, but that was one takeaway from the games. Miguel Amaya, if you lump Tokyo series in with what he did in spring training, he had the first RBI hit
Yeah.
of the season. He hit 500 in spring training games. This is a guy that really turned the corner over the last 2 months, so it was nice to see maybe in this small snapshot sample size, Miguel Amaya is picking up where he left off last year. That would be huge. Um, and then the other thing is just Pete Crow Armstrong is becoming an
Mm.
international star. like, like
Yeah.
fans in Japan and Michael Clare, who works for MLB.com and does a lot of international baseball content. He kind of figured out that it wasn't a group of Cubs fans who had traveled from the States. I mean, maybe there were some sprinkled in there, but this was a local segment of Japanese fans who were chanting PCA, and he called it
That's awesome.
maybe the coolest thing that's ever happened to him. I mean, he flies halfway across the world. Everyone's there to see Shohei Ohtani and Yamamoto and Sasaki and Imanaga and Seiya Suzuki, and we're hearing PCA chants. I mean, that was really cool for
Yeah.
him. And I think it's just another sign for him of just the potential he has, not only as a player, but just like the marketability of this young player
Mhm.
for the Cubs. That this is kind of like a budding superstar, and if this guy can do what he did over the last 2 months offensively, and pair that with his defense, and pair that with his speed, I mean, he's on the cusp of maybe being one of the up and coming superstars of the game. So that was really fun to see. That wasn't like in the game, but kind of just an element of the game that happened. And I guess another thing just from this spring and maybe those 2 games clumped together was just the depth of the bullpen looks real. I think last year
Mhm.
we saw earlier in the season how the depth got really exposed really quickly through injuries and through some guys not performing. And it just looks like, I mean, when you're optioning Eli Morgan to AAA because there's not room
Yeah.
in your major league bullpen to start the season, it's bad news for Eli Morgan, but that's good news for the Cubs. Um, and so I think that was another thing I took away is just kind of watching the names and the players that were rolling out there for the bullpen. It just felt like, all right, this is a deeper group, and there's going to be a lot of ways that Craig Counsell can kind of mix and match and hopefully curb some of those downturns when injuries or subpar performances happen.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into kind of what I want to talk about as far as the notes. The Cubs came back from Japan, had one last week in spring training, last week at camp
Right.
before the game start up again here on Thursday. But one of the first things that happened when the Cubs did come back was Jordan Wicks and Eli Morgan being
Hmm.
optioned to AAA, and that opens a couple spots on the pitching staff. But one of the things that you guys all reported was it 2 days ago or yesterday, was that Brad Keller has been informed he's going to make the opening day or the reopening day roster. I guess he's
Right.
going to start the season on the Cubs active roster. I mean, that's what were your takeaways from the spring about Brad Keller? Because I think that from that first appearance, when he was pumping like 96, 97, it seemed like, oh, this is a guy that the Cubs identified in the offseason and
Mhm.
want to have on this team.
Yeah, well, so just for clarification, the Wicks and Morgan moves, they didn't need their whole starting rotation in Japan. So
Sure.
technically, Jameson Tyone and Matthew Boyd weren't on the roster. So they were able to carry a couple extra relievers. Wicks and Morgan were those guys. So when they got
Right.
back, they had to clear room for this two starting pitchers to come back to the roster. The move that
Mm-hmm.
gets Brad Keller into the bullpen is Tyson Miller is going to go on the IL
Right.
with a left hip impingement. Which again, bad news for Tyson Miller, good news for Brad Keller. I mean, it's an opportunity for him, and this is a guy that they really wanted to try and find a way to get onto the opening day roster as well. Because to your point, not only did he impress statistically, I think he had 9 strikeouts to 2 walks in the small Arizona sample. But this is a guy that was sitting, from the readings we have available, sitting over 96 miles an hour with his fastball, topping out at 97, 98. And if you look at his average velocity last year between the White Sox and the Red Sox, I believe it was in the 93 to 94 range.
Mm-hmm.
He said, and if you look at his monthly from last year, you can see a tick up by August with Boston. He said when he got to Boston, they started showing him some different drills to utilize his lower half different. And it was some drills that he just had never used before in his career. And it kind of just unlocked another layer of velocity. Took that into the winter, continued on that same sort of training regimen. And then when he got to Cubs spring training, they signed him as a minor league non-roster invitee. Continued on that process with more input from pitching coach Tommy Hotovy and their guys. And now we've seen that velocity continue to ramp up, which is, that's eye opening. When a guy comes in early in camp, usually guys are down at the beginning of spring training and you see it start ramping up towards opening day and gaining velocity over the course of the season. When this guy's sitting 96, hitting 98 in February and March, eyebrows start to get raised in a good way. So this is a guy that Craig Counsell kind of called an organizational success, in terms of, like you said, identifying him as a non-roster guy. They liked him early on, potentially as a starting candidate, but now that
Mm-hmm.
they're entering the season with their rotation depth sort of intact to the point that Jordan Wicks gets optioned to AAA,
Right.
they're going to carry Keller as like a multi-inning relief option. And that's another reason why Colin Ray goes to the bullpen, to have
Mm-hmm.
multiple innings available, because again, going back to the Japan trip, the way that disrupted the schedule, it disrupted throwing routines. And so at the front end of the season, some of these starters, you might not see them go typical workload length. So they're going to need a Brad Keller or a Colin Ray available for multi innings
Yeah.
to kind of help bridge those gaps to the late inning guys. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of the, if you were going to circle a name from this spring to say what was one of the success stories, Brad Keller's one of those guys.
Yeah, and like it kind of goes with what you said earlier about the bullpen depth feeling like it's there, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
you option Eli Morgan to AAA, you put Tyson Miller on the injured, or well, he will be put on the injured list, and
Right.
then you're able to add Brad Keller to the roster instead to take one of those spots. Obviously, the 40-man move does still have to be made, and the Cubs don't have to make that till before they play that game against Arizona. But I
Correct.
mean, yeah, I think it just goes more to your point of like the bullpen depth feels it feels like they addressed it pretty well this offseason. Maybe they don't have the highest caliber of closing options or whatever, but it does feel like they have depth from even on the active roster and even down into AAA.
Yeah, and I mean, and kudos to Jed Hoyer for acknowledging that that was a misstep of him an
Mm-hmm.
offseason ago, that they kind of felt that was an area they could figure out in season, and it turned out they were spiraling and scrambling in season. And by the time they did sort it out, that May and June stretch is what essentially cost the Cubs a playoff berth. So I think I think they really emphasized that need to head into a season with a longer, thicker depth chart. And to your point, if you can't get the big name guy at the end, or a couple of those big free agent targets or trade
Mm-hmm.
targets, just lengthen out the middle group and have a depth of options of capable guys that you're not rolling the dice on kind of wild card flyers. These are like Brad Keller has lots of major league experience. So that's a guy that can lean on that even as he kind of adjusts to maybe a slightly different role from what he's accustomed to.
Yeah. And you also had mentioned, Colin Ray shifting to the
Mhm.
bullpen, at least to the start of the season. And obviously that's in part due to the Cubs having Ben Brown starting the season in the rotation, winning that fifth starter spot. I know even at the start of spring training, like that was still a discussion when it kind of
Yeah.
became clear that Assad was hurt and he wasn't going to start the year in the rotation. Like Ben Brown was in that mix, but
Mhm.
I mean, would you say, like, if the start of spring training that Ben Brown was going to be, if someone told you that Ben Brown was going to be that fifth starter, like, is this a little bit of a surprise to you, considering where the Cubs, the guys on the Cubs roster, what Ben Brown a lot of the time missed last year? Like, what I'm trying to say is, like, is this a big shock to you, or is it like, did this become pretty clear over the last couple of weeks that Ben Brown's got a really good shot at it?
I think when Assad got hurt, I think all of our assumption really was that Colin Ray was sort of the next guy up. They
Mhm.
signed this guy as a free agent. Um, he's pitched for Craig Counsell before. This is a guy that logged 100 and plus innings last year for the Brewers. They did sign him as a swing guy, a guy that they knew they could move between the rotation bullpen. But I kind of thought, well, if you're going to just write in a name, Colin Ray is for the fifth guy. But I think at that point, you're still waiting to see, is Ben Brown healthy after kind of that
Mhm.
mysterious neck injury that cost him so much time last year. So when Assad goes down, they can say all they want that, well, Ben Brown's going to be a starting pitcher this year. His innings number was so low. You start thinking,
Yeah.
well, they could control the innings better in a minor league setting, make sure he's healthy. He proved without a doubt he's healthy this spring. And once that doubt was eliminated, I think then he kind of shoots up that chart to say, well, which guy has the higher ceiling? Obviously, it's Ben Brown. He's got the
Yeah.
stuff. He's got the swing and miss capability that maybe is absent from the rest of the rotation. This is a guy that could, in a year or two, be the ace of the Cubs rotation. I mean, so he's got a really, really high ceiling. They want to see what he can do, and if he proves he's healthy, he's got potentially the best stuff on that staff. So I think as we sit here today, it made a ton of sense. And you have Colin Ray right there. So if something happens, he can slot right in
Yeah.
to the rotation. I mean, we saw last year Ben Brown got optioned to the AAA, and then Justin Steele got hurt on opening day, and Ben Brown
Yeah.
was right back up in the major leagues. So you just
Yeah.
never know what's going to happen once the bell rings for the season, and that's why you kind of make some of these moves that preserve depth on the front end of a long season. They may not. Some fans might be upset in the moment about a move, but when you are always sort of thinking in that long
Full
view,
season. Yeah.
then they make sense in that scope.
Yeah, no, and I think I'm with you in that. Like, my initial assumption was going to be that, again, once Assad it was clear he wasn't going to be or be healthy to start the year. It was like Colin Ray. Okay, they paid him $5 million. Like, he has a lot of starting experience. He started for Greg Counsell. Like,
Right.
it made sense. But, like, I will say, when you look at Ben Brown, despite, I mean, he was a 3.58 ERA in 15 games last year. 8 of them were starts. He only pitched the 55 and a third innings before that weird neck issue that's still kind of it's still confusing to me to try to
Yeah.
say what it
It's confusing
was.
to him. I mean, he's even
Yeah.
said he said it was really weird to have an injury that nobody really had an answer for. He
Yeah.
was sort of went through that season.
Terrifying too.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, I think it'll be exciting to see what he can do this
Yeah.
year, and hopefully he stays healthy and kind of starts to hit that ceiling that they think he can reach.
Yeah. Well, when you consider what he had, like what he is when he's right and healthy, I mean, he had like
He
88th
had the
percentile whiff rate. Yeah.
7 no-hit innings against the Brewers with 10 strikeouts. And then it was, I think he made 2 or 3 more appearances in the season
And then
ended.
he
So,
was
like,
done.
he was starting to gain a level of momentum last year that it was getting really
Yeah.
exciting, especially with that near no hitter.
Yeah,
And
80.
then
Then he got 86 percentile velocity on the fastball, 88th
right,
percentile whiff rate, 87th percentile strikeout rate. Like, he brings something that the Cubs just don't really have in the rotation outside of
right,
him. Like, they have obviously good pitchers in the rotation, but, like, this is a different style of how he attacks hitters and gets hitters out. And so yeah, for me, like that makes me very intrigued to see what Ben Brown, now that he's healthy again, what he can do going into this year, which would be, I guess, his sophomore campaign. But
Yeah, and it was
that's
talking to him the other day too. I asked him how beneficial it could be to be in a rotation with someone like Jamison Tyone, another big righty, another guy who came up as a big prospect. Didn't throw as many pitches when he was younger, threw hard like Ben Brown. But if you ask Jamison Tyone now, he'll say he's a better pitcher, a smarter pitcher with preparation, with planning, with reading swings. He's smarter now than he was when he was a kid. And it's almost like if he could pair who he is now with the stuff he had then, he can imagine how good he would be. And it's so now you have a young guy like Ben Brown who can look up to a veteran like that who doesn't have the same velo he used to, but maybe he's a better pitcher now. And that's a guy who you can have conversations with, learn from, and maybe Ben Brown benefits from some of the hindsight that a Jamison Tyone now has as an experienced veteran. So I think
yeah.
it's kind of cool to be the younger guy in this type of rotation where he's got different types of pitchers he can watch and study from and learn from, and maybe he gets the most out of it.
Yeah. A couple other notes coming out from spring training this last week of spring training. Nico Horner so obviously stayed back from the Japan trip, played in some minor league games. I think that first Cactus League game after they came back, he was in the lineup. Expectation is it 100%? Like, is he going to be ready for opening day tomorrow? Reopening day?
Yeah, that's the expectation. Craig Counsell said they made the right decision by having him stay back because he was able to ramp up at bats. As you know from spring training past, it's when guys can go down to the minor league side. You can kind of hit as much as you want. You can lead off every inning if you want. You can just kind of rack up those at bats at a much faster rate than you can in the Cactus League setting, or like he could have in Tokyo. So the front end of his spring was really, we would see him on the agility field, just working on his throwing. Every day he'd get a little further out and you'd start to see him putting a little zip on the ball. And he'd do infield drills with minimal throwing, and they were really monitoring kind of the volume of his work. But he's full go right now. Craig Counsell said maybe expect some days off early on in the season just because he's still building up that 9-inning everyday stamina. But the end goal here is to reach a place where you can say Nico Horner is once again with 100% without a doubt the backup shortstop. Because if Dansby Swanson needs a day off or something were to happen to him, they like Craig Counsell really likes the idea that Nico Horner is the guy that he could put there. It just helps the roster versatility, and then you're not worrying about, I got to carry a third guy to be my backup shortstop on this roster. So that's the end goal, and that was one of the reasons they wanted to go through with this surgery in October, was so he could get back to a place where he could be a shortstop arm-wise.
Yeah, and that's such a huge thing because I think like this offseason, obviously Nico was a part of a lot of trade talk and opening up a position for Matt Shaw or however that went about, right? But you are talking about a guy who, when healthy and can play shortstop, is maybe the best backup shortstop in Major League Baseball. Like, you can't really find a better one with what he does.
Yeah, before they signed Swanson, he was their shortstop, and he was one of the best defensive shortstops in baseball. So it's not that long ago that he had the metrics to back up, like, yeah, this dude can play short. He plays second base because they signed Dansby Swanson. So
exactly.
that's again a big reason why they wanted to go through with that procedure. And then, who knows where the future goes, but then, if other teams look at him as a shortstop as well, it kind of opens up the, I don't want to like throw more trade rumors on it, but if that ever were to come up again, it opens up the amount of teams that the Cubs could talk to about that sort of thing.
Yeah. And then so with him being healthy, or the expectation that he's going to be on the active roster when they reopen the season, that obviously has a little bit of a domino effect on the end of the position player side of the roster, namely Vidal Brujan and Gage Workman. That's something we've been trying to figure out all spring, Japan, and how they've been doling out playing time and all that stuff. But I was going to say they do have to make a decision on one of those two guys because Brujan has no options. Gage Workman, Rule 5 pick. You'd have to get him back to Detroit. But sounds like Brujan could potentially start the year on the IL. Like, how is that shaking out so far? Or right here, getting towards the end of camp and going into the season?
Yeah, by the time this airs, we'll probably know. But
Sure.
but yeah, as we sit here right now on the day before opening day, the latest info we had was Bruhan ran pretty hard into the wall at Sloan Park on Saturday, in an exhibition game against the Rockies, I believe. Um,
Mhm.
and Craig Counsell said he came away with right elbow soreness in the days after that. Said it was actually hurting him more when he was swinging than when he was throwing. So I don't know if that's good or bad news. But this is something that they've been monitoring, and I'm sure they were going to monitor it today on kind of their last workout day. So we'll know soon. But if that's an IL stint, that buys them more time with that decision. It allows them to
Yeah.
keep Gage Workman. I think even without this situation popping up here at the end, I think Gage Workman did enough to kind of convince the Cubs that they should probably keep him. This is a guy that I think the Tigers, after the spring, would love to have back. He's showed the Cubs he can play second, short, third, and the outfield. He's got nice left-handed power. He's a big dude. It's a really, really intriguing young guy that, let's say Matt Shaw falters or they decide, you know what, he needs to go down to AAA for a little bit. You've got Gage Workman who could maybe slide into
Mhm.
third base, and he just really impressed the Cubs this spring. And I would kind of be surprised if he's not on the opening day roster, but we'll see what happens when that comes. Because
Yeah.
Vidal Brujan is the backup center fielder to Pete Crow Armstrong, so that's the other thing they have to weigh is if they don't carry him, your backup options are Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki for center field in a temporary type situation.
Yeah.
But you have Kevin Alcantara sitting at AAA if heaven forbid something were to happen to Pico Armstrong that was more than temporary. So
Mhm.
they kind of have to weigh the is there value in keeping a guy on your bench just because he can be your backup center fielder, or can you patchwork it and know that you have Kevin Alcantara there and keep Gage Workman, who
Mhm.
really showed you something this spring. So it's an interesting debate to have.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting to see which way they go. But again, if Bruhan does end up on the IL, it kind of solves the situation for opening day, domestic opening day, and
Yeah.
buys the Cubs a little more time to kind of make their final call there.
Yeah, we know Jed loves to have a lot of time to make decisions. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, like Gage Workman, like he's made this decision much more difficult for the Cubs
Yeah.
because we talk about like going into spring training and maybe you don't take spring training results that seriously or whatnot. But he's one of those guys that was in a position where it's like he did need to perform in spring. Like you
I was
did
going to
need to
say
take his
there.
results.
Yep. There are
Like,
certain guys in spring training that results absolutely do matter. And a Gage Workman as a Rule 5 guy, it totally matters. And is
and he
that fair
killed
to
it.
him? Yeah. Is that fair to him? Maybe not, but that's the reality of it. Kyle Tucker going 2 for whatever it was in Cactus League play. Like, the Cubs don't care about that. He's Kyle Tucker.
Yeah.
Like, he's going to bat second or third and rack up WAR all season long. So, but yeah, Gage Workman absolutely had to impress, and he did everything that the Cubs asked of him and looked great. And I would be surprised if he's not on the opening day roster.
Yeah, and I think we're on the same page. Like he had the spring that he needed to have to prove to the Cubs like, hey, you should take this chance on me, keep me around. I think that's what
Right.
we're all thinking at this point because of the spring that he had. But yeah, that's
You
about. I
also
mean,
you also
and
want to you also want a culture of showing players we reward players here for earning spots.
yeah, yeah, that's that. Yeah, that as far as just any kind of thing of culture building that you want on your team, like yeah, that like we're gonna give you a shot. It's like again, like back to Brad Keller, like we give you a minor league deal, non-roster invite to spring training, and you earned your way onto the big league roster, onto the active roster to start the year. I think that's something that the Cubs showed with those two guys, and that's something you want to show other free agents or whoever it
Right.
is that hey, like we're gonna give you the chance if you can earn it. So that's about it from the end of spring. And now we go into reopening day in Arizona. First
Hmm.
of the domestic 160 game slate. That's Thursday. Justin Steele starting that first game. It's with Steele,
Yep.
Tyone, Imanaga, and I don't know that they've set a fourth starter for that Sunday game in Arizona.
I'm assuming it's Boyd and then probably
Yeah.
Brown. in Sacramento. But yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
they've officially said that yet.
Okay. And then on the Diamondback side, Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, Brandon Pfaadt, and Eduardo Rodriguez. So the Cubs miss Corbin Burns, former NL Central foe. But I mean, we're going into the season. Cubs are so far 0-2. And again, no shame in dropping 2 games in a very weird, different environment to the World Series champions. But you are 0-2 to start the year. And you go into, what is it, the hardest strength of schedule of any month, of any team's month, is the Cubs March and April slate. And you got 2 more series, I think, against the Dodgers. You got the Padres, the Rangers, the Diamondbacks, even the A's, who were a better team in the second half. And then they're playing in Sacramento. So it's this other weird, different environment. I'm like, you're hitting the ground running. And obviously you don't want to take April too you don't want to take April too seriously, or you want to let the sample grow a little bit more than what you get in April.
Yeah.
But does it feel like a month where like the Cubs need to hit the ground running because this month is so tough, or like is a 500 month a really good outcome for this team in April? Like how are you kind of looking at this early slate?
If the Cubs go into May around 500, even a couple games under 500, no fans should freak out. Like that will be a good outcome given the strength of the schedule this month. If they enter May with a plus 500 record, fans should be ecstatic.
Yeah.
The good news is you're getting these teams some of these teams done out of the way until potentially October if the Cubs were to make the playoffs. And the good news is on the other side of the rainbow, or whatever the opposite of a rainbow is, because April stinks schedule wise, is a May schedule that I think is maybe the easiest May in baseball. So it's, I think it was interesting to hear reactions. Like Jameson Tyone said, this is a good test. It's going to be great to see how we stack up. And if there are issues, we can identify them early and then sort them out throughout the season. So yeah, this is a really good test for us. He asked Craig Counsell and he was kind of like, doesn't really help us to look at it that way. And it's like the schedule's the schedule. We're playing these teams whenever we play these teams, and it's a balanced schedule. So really, every team has virtually the same schedule. It's just the Cubs' hard part comes early and the easier part arrives later. So it was interesting to see the manager kind of take that stance of like, no, we're just going to see what game's in front of us and try and win that game, and all the old cliches, and the player going,
take it one game at a time.
And the player going, this is a great test. So, but again, Tyone was quick to say, like, he used the word, I don't want to overcook it. That you got to beat the last place teams as well. But yeah, I think again, if the Cubs go into May and they're around 500, or even a couple games under 500, fans should not be freaking out. They should be saying that's a good result. It's like a West Coast trip. You always say if a team can go 500 on a West Coast trip, that's a win. Those are not only are the teams
2 of them
hard over
April.
there. Yeah, and yeah, if you fly to Japan and you go 0-2, that's okay. Teams lose 2 in a row throughout the whole season, plenty of times. So I think that's sort of if Cubs fans need a mindset to enter this month, that should be it. That hey, if they're around 500 come May, that's good news.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe it is a benefit to get your hardest stretch of the schedule out of the way in April, because obviously a lot of players are still ramping up or getting into season mode. And then you got, I mean, I guess May, in the same vein, May is like the easiest strength of schedule month for any team in the calendar. So
you think about like Matt Shaw is about to find out how hard the big leagues are. Like you got Yamamoto, and then you got an amped up Roki Sasaki throwing 101 right out of the gate. And now you're going to have some of these starters that are coming up on the calendar are going to be really tough. These opponents are tough. April could be weather-wise, who knows what it's going to be at Wrigley Field. Like this first month for someone like Matt Shaw, it's going to be like, welcome to the big leagues. This is a little different than what you're used to, and that's good. Like it's good to get that type of experience right away for someone like that. And I think I've pointed this out before too. Like having it's one thing to have your manager and your coaches say something, or even the veterans in the room, but Shaw has younger guys like PCA and Miguel Amaya right there in the room who went through this last year and
Mhm.
struggled last year, were allowed to fail in the big leagues last year, and then they both found their footing and had tremendous stretches over the last 2 months. So I think however the shape of Matt Shaw's season goes, it's got to be beneficial for him to have guys in the room like that who just went through it a year ago and
Yep.
he can kind of lean on them for how to navigate through some of those moments.
Yeah. All right, before we get out of here, I do want to just kind of real quick talk about like 2025 expectations. I think it's fair to set the expectations that the Cubs are going to be a playoff team in 2025. Like they have on paper the best team in their division. They're kind of in a
Mhm.
position where they need to make the playoffs. I mean, what are your 2025 expectations? Whether that's for the Cubs as a team, for individual players, what are some of the things that again you've kind of checked as far as like this is what you're looking for in 2025?
Well, they better win more than 83 games, Ryan. We can't do that again.
You don't have the three
Uh,
P.
yeah, the 83 Pete. um, yeah, no, we don't want an 83 Pete. This team should absolutely have the division title as their goal. They should absolutely have, obviously, then making the playoffs is the goal. I don't know how this team stacks up for a deep playoff run, but I know it's a deep roster that should be capable of making the playoffs. And once you get to the playoffs, who knows what could happen? The trick is getting in, and they've missed out the last 2 years pretty disappointingly. I think maybe 2 years ago it was a little more surprising that they were right on the cusp. Last year, I think we
Mhm.
entered like this year. This team should be competing for the division title, and it went worse last year than it did the year before. So um, I think that should again be absolutely be the expectation. And I do think there's a sense of urgency. You can see the types of moves Jed Hoyer made, getting Kyle Tucker and Ryan Presley and some of these guys. There's a good chunk of the roster that's sort of free agents at the end of the year. And he's a potential free agent at the end of the year, Jed Hoyer. So
Mhm.
he's kind of, if they don't make the playoffs, it'll be interesting to see what ownership decides with the structure of the front office, given the expectations now multiple years in a row and falling short multiple years in a row. So
Mhm.
I think you absolutely have to set the bar as winning the division and hopefully for the Cubs' sake and for Jed Hoyer's sake, making a nice deep playoff run.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that's I mean, whether you're a Cubs fan or you're covering the team or whatever, I think
Yeah,
I think honestly it's kind of universal going into this as like 2025 playoffs, like that's realistic for this Cubs team where they're at right now. I mean, I think
right,
for me individually, the player I'm like looking out for most is like outside of obviously Kyle Tucker is the big new addition. He's the on paper at least the best player on the team, superstar.
right.
But I'm looking at Pete Armstrong. Like you talked about him
Yep.
earlier, and what they're he's kind of growing as like a star in Japan. But like you get the Gold Glove level defense, you got the elite base running skills and instincts, and if he can hit like he did in the second half, you're looking. I mean, that could be he could be a massive. He could have a massive impact on this team and those playoff goals and expectations based on the season he has. Because I think we all think he has it in him. He just kind of has to go show it, and that's what I'm looking at in 25.
Yeah, his last 2 months, I think when you rated out, I think it was like a 6 WAR pace over the
Yeah.
last 2 months, which is a star player. So if he can do something close to that, that would be incredible for the Cubs. It immediately changes the way that lineup looks and functions. So that'll be interesting. The other guy that if I'm going to say like name to circle to really watch is, and I feel like we said this every year for the last 3 years in a row, but Seiya Suzuki, like I think
Mm.
this dude has another level. We haven't. He's been a really good hitter. Last year, I think he was top 15 OPS in baseball or the National League. He's been a really good hitter. He's played about 130 games a year because of injuries, but I still think there's another level to Seiya Suzuki that he hasn't unlocked yet. And so he's a guy that I think we'll see with Kyle Tucker around him in that lineup if that has any impact. But
Yeah.
he's a guy I every year I feel like I'm super intrigued to see can Seiya Suzuki find that next level to going from like really good to great.
Yeah. No, and I think if you look at the first 3 years, like it feels like he's gotten more consistently, or
Yep.
he's had longer and longer stretches of that really strong offensive game, but he does still have those low points that you want to see shrinking more and more as the season goes on.
Yep, I agree.
There you go. All right, well, that'll do it for the Addison to 35th podcast. Jordan Bastian, thank you for joining us today. Jordan Bastian of MLB.com, Cubs beat writer. And I mean, you can follow him on was it Blue Sky? You're on Blue Sky.
Instagram.
Instagram is Bastian MLB. Is that where we're at?
Bastian MLB on both of those.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you, Jordan, for joining us today. That'll do it for the Addison to 35th podcast. Until next time, talk to you guys later.